Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Shortlist. As you may have guessed, I am not Social Talent's co-founder and host of The Shortlist, Johnny Campbell. I'm, in fact, Holly Fawcett. I'm the Director of Content here at Social Talent, and I'm stepping into the hot seat for today on a topic that I'm really passionate about, actually, which is really about attracting and retaining future talent. And with me for this week's session, I'm going to be bringing in Robbie Mac Giolla Phadraig, who I have sparred with many a time about this particular issue. And so good afternoon, Robbie. Welcome to The Shortlist.
Good to see you, Holly.
Robbie, rather than me introduce you to the rest of the world and probably tell a few tales, because would you like to share a bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from, and yeah, a little bit of something around your expertise in this area?
From Dublin, I've been a co-conspirator and sparring partner of yours and your colleagues for some time. I think actually an early adopter of your platform, in fact. And yeah, I'm one of the co-founders and CCO of Sigmar Recruitment, which is probably the third largest recruitment company here in Ireland. We support a lot of kind of US investment into Ireland and expansion internationally. Also founder of Talent Summit, which is the largest HR leadership conference in Ireland and one of the largest HR leadership conference series in Europe now, I believe. We've been running that for 11 years. So that brings
11
us
years.
11 years.
Sorry.
Yeah. You've been on the
Time
journey with us,
flies.
Holly. You've been on the
I know.
journey,
I
and
know.
it's
Yeah.
I think the kind of digital kind of space over the last 18 months probably broadened that community to about 7,500 HR leaders around Europe mainly. But it's brought us close contact and into further sparring with other kind of HR innovators from around the world. And then in addition to that, then we run a trade mission to the US every year called Ireland Gateway to Europe, where we partner with US investors to support their investment and expansion into Europe and EMEA. But the talent space is where I live and breathe. I have 3 young girls, Daisy, Robin, and Lily. And today marks the first day of the Elves and the Shelves.
Oh, so where is the elf hiding today?
So the elves found partners last year, and they now have baby elves. So now there's 3 elves per each girl, right? And I'll just share this little story with you. The 2 weeks ago, my eldest girl, Daisy, she's 9, she lost her tooth, and my youngest, Lily, has a wobbly tooth. So this is the kind of the sideline conversation in my house at the moment. So we actually had to break the news to Daisy that the tooth fairy no longer exists 2 weeks ago. And really surprised by her reaction, Holly, she cried. And we said, look, it's the tooth fairy. Like, you're 9 years of age. And the reason we told her is because she was going out to my brother's house. He's a daughter, same age, and she is streetwise. And she would have shaken Daisy down for her tooth fairy money. So explained this to Daisy. Daisy then said, look, I don't really care about the tooth fairy, but what does this mean for Santi, for the elves on the shelves? I said, the elves on the shelves. She goes, Dad, do not tell me that they're not real. I said, darling, how could we be so cruel as to lie to you that the elves on the shelves aren't real? So they landed yesterday. And I actually shared that story with my brother, right, about his going out to his daughter's house the next day. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember telling my son, his son, my nephew, about the big man at Christmas. And he said, he's going to secondary school. He said, Ronan, we need to talk to you. And he said, look, about the big man. He goes, Dad, I know. You don't have to tell me. He goes, what do you mean you don't have to tell me? He said, he goes, look, I know Jesus Christ doesn't exist. So I think that the lesson of all of these stories, Holly, and I'll finish here, is knowing the difference between what we think our people care about and what they truly care about, I think have changed. And I think that's what we've been through over the last 18 months. And I think our elves on the shelves, we need to do an awful lot to understand the value of them, what they are, and what truly matters to our people.
Well, that is a wonderful parable and fable that I would never have been able to pull out of that story. Well done, Robbie. Well done. But yes, the poor elves on the shelves. The elves on the shelves don't live here yet in our house, because our little boy isn't old enough to know about Santa. So we have a few more years to go, I think, before they're going to make their own their landing here in this house. But thank you very much, Robert. And you're dead right. Tomorrow's talent, and actually even today's talent, we absolutely need to reevaluate what they appreciate and what they want. I suppose that really leads us incredibly nicely. This beautiful segue. Thank you so much, Robbie,
Strangely.
for this conversation. It's wonderful, isn't it? So today's conversation is really about attracting and retaining tomorrow's talent. I would nearly reframe that about just today's talent in general, because attracting and retaining talent today is absolutely imperative for all of our organizations as we're recruiting. And I think really, given what's happened over the last 18 months, it's really not surprising that we've gone through, a bit of an identity crisis around work, because we've gone through an identity crisis in general and have had to do work at home for the majority of that as well. And I think all of the conversations that we've had over the past number of months on the shortlist has really seen that shift from employer to employee in terms of power, and how that's changed from, work is not really somewhere that we go, it's actually something that we do, and are we doing the right thing? So I really want to see how this means for employers and for recruitment today, and see what your viewpoint is around that power shift, that power moving from employer to employee, and as you're saying, really identifying what it is that employees want. How is this, or have you seen anything in particular come about straight away that you think we need to change about how we approach work?
Absolutely. Like, isn't it a fascinating time? Um, I don't think this amount of change has happened within our working lives to the level that it has, clearly. And again, we've been talking about the war for talent for I don't know how long. We've been talking about the HR folks having no longer being on the menu and all of a sudden having the seat at the table. But the war for talent, we know what it means to measure, to drive behaviors, to use tools, innovation, technology to articulate our point of difference and attract. I think the war has moved on to an internal war, and this battle for attention is really the new front upon which it's being fought. And we need a whole new arsenal of weapons. And it's really a war for hearts and minds, Holly. And I don't think we give enough kudos, recognition, or measure the re-recruitment of our folks that's happening daily. We measure the exit, we measure the entry point of new talent into our business, and even the language, even using the word talent, I'm not sure it's apt or captures the shift. If I just step back and look at what we've been through, which is important if we're going to look at kind of content, or we need to explore the context. So the kingdom in which content is king is important to understand. So my quick reflection, I think we've gone from using a dating analogy from living with our employees as employers. We've entered into this long distance relationship, haven't we? And what happens with long distance relationships? And it has happened. They've fizzled. But those who have traveled are our employees, and they are the ones who have been opened up to a whole new world of opportunity, literally, new experiences and new adventures, and we're the party in this relationship who have remained at home as employers. And when I think that through, we're now at a point where it may be feasible. Now it's up and down, I know, but it certainly was from September to maybe 2 weeks ago. It was feasible to ask the other party to return from traveling. And as employers, I think this option to give it a go once more, I think there's been two effects. Some have deepened their commitment, and others have voted with their feet. So I think we're seeing a second wave of this movement of folks. And again, if I think that point true, I think we are no longer, or in many cases, no longer as relevant and no longer as attractive as a partner to the partner who has gone on their travels over the last 2 years. I think that whole question of what makes us relevant and attractive is increasingly under scrutiny. And I think we are slow to cotton on to what has changed as employers by and large. And again, the power has completely shifted. And if I look at how you opened, Holly, around the identity of work itself, the psychological contract of work, it's run very deep with people. And I think the last 18 months, our working selves and how we identify with our working selves has shrank. And I
Mm.
think the holistic sense of ourselves has broadened because both happen on a daily basis and are much more deeply intertwined. And as you mentioned, it's no longer somewhere we go. We've got a separate headspace. It's increasingly just part of what we do and who we are. And I think the identity is now under question. But I think the other thing is that work has become deeply individualized, and the shift has gone from employee experience to that of human experience. And we haven't reflected that in how we look to attract people. And I think that's what needs to change.
Mm. So, what was the difference then, maybe between employee experience versus human experience? What are the some of the immediate things that people would no longer that would no longer be relevant that we have done always in the past that we may think are still going to be there, but actually, when you like think about it in that much more holistic context, I love that analogy of it being a long distance relationship, where one of our parties has gone off on their travels for a while and have seen the grass is definitely greener on other sides. But like ultimately, what is it that we need to just ditch into the bin, or do we just? It's a couple of things that we need to just tweak. Like what is it that we need to do to move from employee experience to human experience?
Okay, so sticking with that analogy, I think at the same time, online dating has become a very real thing. So remote working has opened up the world. So we've another contextual challenge that we're operating within.
Mm.
Um, when I look at the human experience, or HX, as we call it, um, I think the loyalty towards employers has changed. It's no longer as deep. And we talk about
Mm.
EVP, don't we? So
Mm-hmm.
again, what is our employer value proposition? And if you close your eyes for one moment and visualize a brand who you feel, you don't have to literally do it.
I'm
Go
doing
for it,
it,
go
of
for it,
course.
go for it, go for it. You know you have a 9-month-old. Any chance, close your eyes,
Any
Holly.
chance for a bit of sleep? Sorry.
Yeah. I'll have that effect. But if you think about this, right? So who are the most attractive brands when it comes to employer value proposition globally? Like, give me three at the top of your head, Holly.
The most
Don't give me
attractive
any,
employer
Holly. Actually,
brand.
don't give me any, right? So you think, don't you think of the usual suspects? You think of like some of the kind of
Ah, yeah,
the tech companies and
the
so on,
big
right? And
tech companies. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what you visualize a lot of the frills,
Mm-hmm.
and now I think remote working has gone from being this kind of 5-star experience, which is based around place,
Mm.
now to more around around the not just the employer value proposition or place or the frills of the employer, but remote working being more individualized is more around low cost. It's more around the efficiency of work. It's more around what matters is actually going from A to B. It's not the daily kind of frills of what creates the experience, that
Mm.
we identify when we think of the brand of the employer. So
Mm.
the shift, I think, from the loyalty piece has gone. And I think even before the pandemic, we're at a point where it shifted from EVP to nearly kind of job value proposition. Like a lot of people we would have been speaking with would have spoken a lot about the team dynamic, the individual they're working with, the impact they're having. So again, not just getting 1% efficiency over like a 2-year period for a specific product or category. It's more around like how can they really move the dial around the growth of the
Mm.
organization. So there's a stage and there's a kind of a career trajectory impact around the job itself. And that's what truly mattered to a lot of folks. And therefore the reward, and therefore the motivation, and therefore the career trajectory and opportunity. So that kind of job value proposition is what
Mm.
was developing as competitive advantage when we spoke to the marketplace on behalf of our clients. And I think what's
Mm.
changed most around the HX has been the experience value proposition. So, how can
Mm.
employers give the experience that is being sought? And people think immediately of flexibility. I'm not thinking like flexibility flexes both ways. Like, we haven't, in my opinion, been through a one-way door, Holly. This is a two-way door. And frankly, I believe we've over romanticized remote working. Like, we don't have enough data. We haven't done it for long enough at the scale that we have been doing it in peace times to really get a
Mm.
sense of what that means when it comes to competitive advantage to attract people, but also from a leadership perspective to make sure that we're showing up for our people when needed most. And I think that's what we've been through. But now, how do we sustain that is a very different question. So I think the experience or the focus and the experience of work itself and how that fits into each individual's world, which is a highly tailored message. And it's something actually that can't be predetermined. It's something that's experienced during the engagement and selection process and needs to be tailored per individual.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, and I'd love to kind of dig into a little bit more about um, the career trajectory of individuals. But when we are doing remote working, for example, there's a tendency, particularly for organizations where they were doing remote working or hybrid working, where some people were remote and others were office based or location based, that those who were, I suppose, promotion is based on proximity a lot of the time. And if you are in proximity to your leaders who have the power to therefore promote you, you're more likely to be noticed for that promotion, more likely to be highly networked, and therefore more likely to actually get that promotion. So your career trajectory is actually on the direction that you're looking for. Whereas those who are remote are often, they're not as well networked. They're often forgotten about, and because they don't have that proximity, they don't get that promotion. So, is that something that we can repair, I think, going forward, or are actually people looking for an upwards trajectory in their career? They're looking for other directions.
I think that's been the narrative, isn't it? Like it's about proximity bias, and people logically think those who are further from decision making have less opportunity. I think it depends on what you do. And there's an equal argument for the distractions that come through being in office. So therefore, to somebody who has a full run of the day, given very clear tasks, but all the working kind of structures and practices geared towards individual type work, do they not have a competitive advantage over those who are bogged down by distractions in office? So again, it's a bit of a seesaw effect. Now, I do largely agree with the point that there's a proximity bias. I think we have a whole new world of equality and kind of balance that's will come out, I think, over the coming months and years. That's a whole new front around diversity and inclusion. And it's now based on location, not the traditional ways we think about diversity, inclusion, and equality. But I think about this differently, right? So not just about proximity. I always think about like an organization being like a structure, and I think about the individual building blocks. Think of a brick wall, an individual building block being the human capital, and the cement that binds us is the social capital. It's how we collaborate. The ingredients in that cement is what makes work more sociable. It's what makes it more productive. It makes it more elastic, stronger, or weaker. So the ingredients that goes into that cement is really what makes us better. And I think what has happened over the last while is that it's actually the cement that's been broken, isn't it? We've distributed all of these building blocks and our organizational human capital. That's what's being distributed. And now we're looking to kind of bring elements of that back. So what binds the bricks that are closer versus the ones that are further? I think there's something around our competitive advantage around collaboration, productivity, and actually, therefore, our message to the marketplace of what work and the experience of work means to the individual that needs to be fully understood for each organization. And I would therefore argue the point, Holly, that I think the real career advantage is actually the managerial capital. It's the capital you build up with those in decision making, those who make and break opportunity for every individual. And some of that is there's a benefit through being closer, and some of that is actually, if it's geared towards output, you have an advantage through being full-time remote. But knowing how we typically make decisions, it's usually and often a conversation before a meeting or a meeting after the meeting where we convene that we kind of make decisions or have done historically at least. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it all needs to be unpacked, but the ingredients in that managerial and or social capital are really what matter most.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree more. I think, and obviously moving to an output focused type of organization or certainly a leader where you are really focused on the outcomes and the inputs there. aren't as specific because they're not time bound, right? Those inputs could happen fitting in and around family and life, and therefore having that flexibility as you're talking about. Those inputs can happen incredibly efficiently or inefficiently, right? Some people are just really, really, really efficient, and boom, they get their work done very, very fast because they just are able to focus. And others may not be as efficient with putting in those inputs, particularly as they're learning, right? But it's always the outputs and outcomes that need to matter in order for you to be able to move to better and I suppose more a better position that you're looking for in terms of your own growth, rather than necessarily always a promotion upwards in the organization, but certainly getting to work on great projects that you're always like itching to get towards. I think it's that outcomes that are always going to be key.
Yeah, and I also think when you again think that through. So how long do we have for this, Holly? We've probably a lot of ground to cover, but I might just share one final thought if you don't mind.
Go on, yeah.
It's I didn't even ask the question; I just railroaded it in. The culture, what's changed? Like, was culture in most organizations really truly built in an environment? It's how we experience each other, isn't it? Really, like there's very few who have been built as fully distributed first. We know the handful of examples who were there before the pandemic. We know the companies like Hopin and so on who've done great work in scaling since the pandemic. So there's all these outliers, but by and large, I think when we think through what most companies believe to be their competitive advantage around retaining, attracting, driving performance of their people to deliver for the customer, we think of culture and guided by values. And the way I think about this, I just obviously North Star purpose and the driving 10 commandments, whatever, of the behaviors are our values. And I'd ask the question of what values have been stretched most over the last 18 months, 2 years, and which have shown up most for our people when they were needed. And I think there's a complete overhaul required for our value sets in who we are and how we work. And that therefore equals our evolving value proposition to the marketplace. Like, have we not all become like as the health and well-being of our people not like gone right up as a kind of key value in all of our organizations? Yet we haven't repackaged that or articulated that in a very clear, concise way. And I also think about proximity and purpose in the equation of values. And I think of the All Blacks. So the highest performing, until we beat them recently, one of the highest performing sporting teams in any sport in the world, right? So
I'm sure if the All Blacks played rugby, they'd be fine, but I'm sure if they played cricket, they'd be a very different team.
yes. So anyway, the All Blacks, right? So they don't have a home venue. They don't have a training ground. They rotate and they go to different locations. So what has driven the culture of high performance amongst the All Blacks? It's been more about ideology and belonging as opposed to values that are experienced in one place. So I think a distributed workforce is more of a lean on ideology and less on how values are experienced. And I don't think we've clearly articulated and probably understood that to the degree that we need to, if we are to continue to cultivate and to prune our cultures that we've long prized as being our point of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, because I'm conscious that while this conversation is fascinating, and I want to continue for the next 20 minutes on this.
Go.
I'm being prompted that we actually have an agenda for this show, but I will leave you with one quote before we move on to our first news article for today's shortlist, which is from Howard Fidler. So I was doing my learning on social talent today, which was on Bev Kay's program, Love It, Don't Leave It, about finding that purpose in your own job, which is actually, it was quite useful for today's conversation, really. But this wonderful quote from Howard Fidler was, values, I actually wrote it down, values are the emotional salary of work, and some people are earning no wages at all. So yes, unfortunately, some people aren't earning anything when those values aren't aligned. And I think you're dead right.
Nice.
Those values have been stretched to some degree, and those are probably the ones that we never really ascribed to in reality. We're more aspirational, but the ones that are really showed up, I think those definitely are our true values. And so, with that in mind, our first article for today that to really drive on this discussion is really around the retention piece more so than anything else, not really on attraction, but from a retention perspective. This was an article from the Harvard Business Review, 6 strategies to boost retention through the Great Resignation. This was from 3 Boston Consulting Group analysts 4 Boston Consulting Group analysts who really actually 6 very, very useful, quick strategies that organizations can deploy to really bring in retention. The first was on incentivizing loyalty. So it's interesting that you're talking about what that loyalty means, and incentivizing loyalty being through compensation. I think we all recognize that compensation does need to be a strategy that we put in. The second was providing opportunities to grow. The third, elevate your purpose, very much so along the lines of that. Prioritize culture and connection was the fourth. The fifth was invest in caring for employees and their families. And the sixth was embracing flexibility. Are there any of those 6 that kind of pull out to you, or do you think, oh, that's rubbish? I wouldn't really agree with that at all.
Like it sounds like ubiquitous language. We're talking about all of these words, all of these themes for like 2 years very intensely. But who has really executed, like when the rubber hits the road, who has really delivered this, and who has been really clear at articulating and communicating the true value of all of these initiatives and all of these things that matter to our people? I don't think anyone's really cracked this, quite frankly. Some have done elements of it. I also note you always, in social talent, with you or Johnny or Vince, for anyone's presenting, you always reference Harvard Business Review, The Economist, Financial Times. I never see of any of the papers that you actually read reference when you're quoting any articles in our space, you know. I look forward to seeing them. So the Sun's, the World, and the Irish Times. But anyway, I've been kind with the Irish Times, but just stop. So financial. Do you remember, Holly, the government savings scheme that the Irish government launched? So some of the listeners will probably know. So was the
Like 20 years ago?
Yes, yeah. It was Bertie Ahern. I remember doing it, and I actually had it as my kind of methods to save for, say, my first mortgage or whatever.
For context for listeners or for watchers, this is where for every €4 you saved, the government would give you an extra 1. So it would give you a 20% return on your savings. Yeah, if you kept it for 5 years. So maximum, I think, was €1,000. Yeah, was it €1,000 maximum a month or something like that?
Yeah, but and it went on for 2 years or something. Yeah, and you couldn't touch it. Yeah. Well remembered. So
and then everyone bought cars with it at the end when they all matured.
I think it actually was the catalyst for the Celtic Tiger, which ended in spectacular collapse. But anyway, you think about financially incentivizing retention. So again, like what are the main pressure points, certainly for us, and say for our kind of average kind of recruiter in our business, is usually a kind of a life decision. Usually, we tend not to lose to our competition. A lot of it's in-house, quite frankly. So they're going to the multinationals, they're going to tech companies and so on. But there's usually a life decision, and it's usually around, say, buying a house or reaching a ceiling. But if you look at financially, so one good one I learned was actually to have like a mortgage savings scheme for that cohort, who are probably at an age maybe in their 20s, where the company's working with them over a 2-3 year periods to match fund or to contribute towards like a savings scheme. Obviously, any kind of LTIP and kind of options are good ways to retain, but I think the tax treatment of those is something that's under question. But when I think about what retains people, what's good news, I'll give an example. I often think of the influencers of our people. So quite often they'll go home to their nearest and dearest, or they are at home with their nearest and dearest, back to our point, and they'll share the news after their day's work. So you leave the desk you're at now, Holly, you go to that couch, You'll sit down with your husband, you'll be there with the baby or having dinner, whatever it might be, and you're going to share your news. And quite often, the response our people receive from their influencers is what drives much of their feeling around what works for them and their family. So something that can be directly correlated with a lifestyle enhancement, I think, is a positive thing. Something around career development. I know Fidelity, for example, kind of touches on the kind of the learning piece, but they offer 1 day every 2 weeks now to learn a new technology for their developers. So they get to
Wow.
collaborate 1 day every 2 weeks. And obviously they're upskilling for themselves and there's a whole world of innovation coming out of this. But it was much more frequent than I've ever heard before, you know. Um, and it kind of feeds in then to if it's lifestyle, then it brings in the question of the sustainable performance. So we'll probably get to that in a bit. So look, the financial piece is really, really important. And I think looking after the well-being of our people, they need to be performing to a level where they're earning and they're, again, realizing their individual potential. And again, it's not an holistic kind of painting brush. We can come in and just kind of paint everyone with the one brush, but it needs to be, again, bespoke and down to the experience of work, but also how it overlaps with their human experience. And if we can feed the human experience and support the human experience as part of their partnership with us as employers, I think that's going to help with retention.
Yeah, I love that idea actually of matching funds. Like if we understand what the financial incentives are of our employees, like for example, if people have, in ridiculous student loans, for example, that they're really struggling to pay off, or they're trying to save for that down payment on a mortgage, or they're looking to save for their retirement, they're trying to pay for their children's education, whatever that is. Like, everybody does have an incentive. And I think once we earn enough to take the issue of money off the table, that usually gives us that flexibility then to think elsewhere. But anything that's creative, that organizations can do in order to retain people, I think is very, very useful. I really love that idea. In terms of things like embracing flexibility, you were saying earlier that it's definitely a two-way door when it comes to flexibility. And obviously employees have been incredibly flexible for employers by putting the foot down on the accelerator when times really need it, especially during the intensity of the pandemic, when I'm sure all of us worked more hours than we ever have in an office because we were at home, and therefore we didn't have the commute, and therefore it was much easier just to have the emails on all the time. And suddenly that blur happened much easier, I think, than when we had that separation from work because of a commute. So what can organizations do, I think, in order to encourage and embrace that flexibility that employees need?
Just live it and breathe it. Again, like we talk about, again, like flex on the city. Again, I've loads of them, Holly. You don't want to know.
I love it. I love
it. So a lot of people have changed their tune. A lot of people have changed their tune. And there's also polarized views, aren't there? On what flexibility is, and to what benefit and to what cost. Now, my own feeling is we are a tribe better together. Certainly here at Sigmar is my feeling, and again, we give as much flexibility as people need, and it's not just like around time. Like, flexibility has to kind of be stitched into every aspect of their experience of us. And we haven't cracked it. We certainly have not cracked it. Now, we built a bar out our back garden to encourage people to convene more, and again, into a safe space, which has been well used. So it's really just have a reason and a place that's safe to convene, more so for new people that haven't really got together. But look, it's as flexible as is being demanded. Like, employment is demand driven. If our people are demanding it, it's how flexible we need to be. But I don't think like our work practices are really syncing what we need to deliver for ourselves, for where we have places of work, but more importantly for our customers. And again, like, I think that's where we need to have some realistic, maybe challenge to flexibility. If it goes beyond or gets to a place where it's not delivering for our customer, we need to question it. And then I think we need to show probably balanced leadership and making sure that it's as flexible as it needs to be. And I don't, again, look, choose your poison. Like, it's a broad spectrum. But if it's about being competitive in the marketplace, it's as much as being demanded. And then it's a question of there'll be peaks and troughs of times where the flex needs to work in the other direction to show up for the customer when you are needed most. So it works both ways.
Yeah, and I think honestly, when individuals do experience that flexibility where they receive it because they needed it at that time, they're so much more willing to be flexible on the other side then when the time comes. So long as I think that's made relatively explicit, you know, okay, yeah, happy to flex here for you if you're happy to flex me when I need you most as well, or when I need a little bit more of your time. And I honestly do believe that virtually everybody is perfectly fine with that.
But look what's being, so if you read like the average job description now, right? So like most people like work from anywhere is baseline. Like there's a baseline expectation, right? A baseline. And if you look at, like, I don't see any edgy, innovative, like creative, like articulation of like a real, true, long-term, flexible way of working. So everyone's promoting work from anywhere, like fully distributed, right? So if we aren't geared or built, and 99% of companies in the world have not grown or come from that world. So we're trying to recreate where, by whom, and how work gets done. And I honestly believe we will revert to a lot of our old habits. A lot of ways of working will contract once more when we're allowed to reconvene in a wholesale way. And I would really question, like, what are we building for the future? Like, if somebody chooses to work from anywhere, if they choose to relocate and to do individual contributory work and don't, like, I'd question the trajectory of their career, quite frankly, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. Or I might be completely like out of sync and I'm no longer attractive as an employer. You know what I mean? So look, this is the split that's happening, isn't it? Like, you know, but I think we like, actually, do you remember Paddy McCord?
I do. Yes, I
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
So again, the chief people officer at Netflix, and she managed a lot of that early transition, author, TED speaker. So she was a long time telling me about, like, we talk about like the short tenure of our workforce. So 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, and we're all giving out about retention. And we kind of used to equate that to millennials and kind of growth and expectation and being more demanding and less loyalty. And her point to me, this is 4 years ago, 5 years ago, was like, why are we constantly giving out about this? And why don't we reverse engineer our thinking to look to leverage the value of a worker who is now worth maybe 5 years and done 3 stints with world-class companies? How do we re-engineer our workflows to get as much as possible from that fabulous experience instead of giving out about it and saying no to these people because we think they're job hopping? So the same goes for flexibility. How do we re-engineer our work practices to ensure that we get as much as we can for our customers and also for our people? Like, this is baseline. We show up for our people. We got their well-being, and it's about the sustainable support of our people. That goes without saying. Everything else on top of that has to work towards what's being sought in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, do you know what? The job hopping nature of some kind of work. I was the New York Times this morning. They do as they do every single morning.
Show
They
off.
have an episode of their podcast. I'm sorry, The Daily is a podcast I listen to religiously every
Yeah.
weekday, outside of American holidays, of course. But the episode from today was all about Amazon and their absolutely relentless consumption of people, but also realizing that people are a finite resource. You know, it's a non-renewable resource if you're eating them that fast. And they literally, their churn rate per year in their warehouses is 150%, meaning that every 8 months they are replacing 100% of every role in their warehouses. which is bananas. But with that in mind, they also understand that, look, these are 8 months that we're going to get out of these people. Let's absolutely get the absolute most that we can. Let's ramp them up as quickly as we possibly can. But they have had to do a bit of an about face where Jeff Bezos, his motto of being the world's most customer-centric organization has had to flip to where this is the most customer-centric organization where people love to work. It's a destination employer. And because their people are looked after in their warehouses, they will therefore look after their customers.
Nice.
That he's realized that has definitely linked the two together, thank goodness, because warehouse work at that pace is unsustainable. Regardless of how much money you throw at the problem, money is not always the answer. So it is all those other additions, like having that flexible working, or having where you're prioritizing culture, where you're prioritizing that purpose, people can really see what they're actually delivering for. And that's what's going to retain people, rather than just pay them $15 an hour as a minimum, give them healthcare. It's also giving those other opportunities, as you're saying, around flexibility, around caring for people, making sure you have their well-being center of mind, and that of their families as well. And that's probably what's going to retain them.
But if we think, and like we probably come from a world, Holly, where we act, behave, and think like missionaries. You know what I mean? It's about culture, growth, future, value creation, people, caring. And if the market has changed to people thinking like mercenaries, there's a collision. They're two very different things. So I think there's a bit of adjustment required on both sides. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a mercenary type of organization, we do have the one last article before we finish up for today, which was from the New York Times. And it was that Wall Street is grudgingly allowing remote work as bankers have dug in. So finance employees who couldn't imagine working from home before the pandemic are now reluctant to return to the office, and their bosses can't figure out how to bring them back. I remember reading a lot on Investopedia about what's it like to work as an analyst or a banker. Oh, I know, sorry, yeah. But these are people who do 100-hour weeks, Monday to Friday. They're not in over the weekend, but it's Monday to Friday, 100 hours, and they're in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they leave the office maybe by midnight. And it's this relentless, incredible workload that they have to do, and now they're doing it from home, and they don't want to come into the office. And initially, my thinking around bankers was, oh gosh, it must be like they can't get a Bloomberg terminal at home. They can't, it's all the security things. There might be something, I don't know, there might be a hack or something like that of a work computer. But really, it's more than that. The fact that employees are actually saying, no, sorry, I'm not going to be coming into the middle of the city and commuting for an hour each way on top of the 100 hours I do in the office. I can perfectly well do this from home. And I think really it's about the right tools, the right resources for them to be able to do their work, and then the right leadership, that they have leaders who really do recognize what they're going to do. And that's maybe how bankers will get into that. But was there anything maybe from this, as the most reluctant laggard type organization or industry to not possibly do work from home, or the employees are just going, no, not doing it, not coming back into the office, it's too risky?
Yeah. So I'm meeting a banking CEO for dinner this evening, and even choosing.
Fun.
I know. It's and just even choosing what to wear. Like, I was much more conservative, and I will wear a suit. And again, we're a supplier, and again, we're a partner and a collaborator. And that's more of a, I think it's just a decision that probably ties into maybe the culture, like maybe that Wall Street culture, which I think is quite unique, as is London City kind of culture. But we think about this, or the way you describe it, Holly, is employee and employer. So the employer is demanding the return of the employees. I think there's something much deeper around this kind of peer-to-peer expectation, kind of influence. And if it is a macho culture that is as we expect or understand Wall Street culture could be, there might be a very different influence at play, where like there is that like presenteeism, kind of expectation. There is that kind of I think nearly kind of a like I forget who said it now, which CEO said it, but like if you can go to a restaurant in New York, you can come into the office. Like, was there like a table bang moment, wasn't it? Like, it's like just get your arse in here,
Yeah,
where there's a
I think
question
that was
around.
JP Morgan actually around banking,
So
speaking
Jamie
of
Dimon,
which.
was it?
So I possibly was, yeah. I think in a way they're kind of right, but also presenteeism is a problem. To be seen to be working in order to have a value ascribed to your work is the wrong way to manage, in my opinion. I really do I think outcomes as is the most important thing, and obviously they come through inputs, regardless of how those inputs happen. But do you need to be seen to be doing those inputs in order to get the
Of course
value
not.
from them? I
No,
don't
no,
think
no, no,
so.
no, no, no,
Yeah.
no. But the opposite's also true, and I'll leave it on this, Holly. So
Hmm.
virtualism. So again, I think
Oh
it's
yeah.
something very, yeah, it's something very different now. And I think it's like if you work in an international organization, that there's a question uh, around your availability. And if we are to really humanize and really individualize work, the working patterns and nearly like the peer-to-peer service level of when available, what's expected, and availability to work needs to be clearly articulated at a very granular one-to-one level. So expectations are managed, and we don't have this virtual theism become a significant challenge and issue as we figure out where we are to work over the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. Virtual theism. I like that. I will be stealing that. Thank you very
Take it.
much, Robbie.
Take it with two hands.
I will indeed. So as we come towards the end of our time, I can't believe 46 minutes have gone by already. We ask all of our guests for one last piece of advice that they could add to our shortlist. Robbie, what have you got for us?
On.
Oh, absolutely anything.
Okay. To see the shelf behind me.
I do.
Yeah, to see all those books.
Yes.
One of those pillars or columns of books are gifts that are received from social talent. Yeah, and again, if you look at the fireplace, there's a bottle of
Mhm,
liqueur, which was another gift from somebody else.
mhm.
There'd be one of those going home this evening, Holly, and I'll let you decide which one it was. But to circle back to your question, one piece of advice. Yeah, I think to really figure out our post-COVID renewed commitment, value proposition, values, to get clear on them, and to make everyone understand what they are, and to get that balance right. If it's really about delivering or commitment or drive or growth, and usually elements of that proposition and behavior sets and values is about
Mm,
growth. And I think the one winner over the last 18 months has been well-being in the truest sense of the word. And to pinch an analogy from the sporting world, person first, player second, I think we need
mm,
to really stick with that, continue on that commitment. And I mean that in the truest sense. And quite often, it's this constant challenge I think we'll face into between well being and well doing. I think with less resources in our organizations, there's a chance that we may go backwards with the amount of demand for our products and services in this kind of growth market. But well being also means ensuring that our people do well, that they do well. And there's a big question around the cost of high performance. I know there's been some examples that have come out from the last Olympics. It's been the longest training cycle for any Olympics in history, 5 years, because of COVID.
mhm.
And I think there's a significant fallout on a personal human level from a lot of those athletes. I heard of one suicide, in fact, of an
Oh,
athlete in New Zealand. And again, I think the question of at what cost, high performance at what cost, and the
mm,
sustainability, and ultimately to try and keep what we've gained and to reclaim what we've lost in a very in a sustainable way is important. But again, it starts knowing that we're backing our people, showing up for them in order to show up for our customers.
I like that. Yeah, sustainability is definitely an interesting trend, not just from a climate change perspective, but I think with that in mind, and even coming back to what Jeff Bezos had realized, that humans are a finite, non-renewable resource. Sustainability is definitely something we need to focus on for our people. Robbie, I love that. Thank you so much. And this has been a really fascinating conversation. Not a sparring one. I know we didn't disagree as much as I expected us to, but thank you so much.
When you start with the tooth fairy and you start with the elf of the shelves, it kind of takes out any potential to spar.
I agree, and I hope the elf on the shelves are well behaved over the next couple of days and aren't up to too much mischief. Indeed, Robbie, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your expertise in this topic. I've really appreciated this conversation. And join us next week. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Join us next week on the Shortlist, same time, Wednesday at 4 p.m, where we'll be talking about COVID and the rise of anti-Asian sentiment. We'll have Lucy Sheen, who is an actress, a playwright, and a digital artist. A really, really interesting perspective on this. I really hope you join us for that conversation. That's Wednesday, the 8th of December at 4 p.m. GMT. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.